Fraser Yachts is one of the largest yacht brokerages in the world, and today we have Anders, the CEO. This is the Eardley Bird Business Podcast with me, Oli Eardley. So, Anders, where I'd like to start is I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and really your journey to becoming the CEO of Fraser Yachts. So I was wondering if you could talk me through that, first of all.
For sure. First of all, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And as I find with many of my colleagues within the industry, what sort of led me in this direction, I guess, was a fundamental love for boats, boating, yachts, being at sea. So I grew up in my native Finland, where we had a summer cottage, and my grandfather had an old wooden sailboat, so I was literally carried on board that boat before I could walk. So I've sort of grown up boating, both sailing and running power boats. Then as the years went by, I have a business degree, tried my hand at a regular job, worked for about 7 years in IT. This was in the early dark ages of the web in the mid to late 90s, which was in many ways a lot of fun. It was an exciting time because the internet was really revolutionizing many things. So highly grateful for that experience. But then after a little while, as you get older, you recognize that life is not a dress rehearsal. And for me, perhaps it felt more pertinent and important to do something that I really, truly was passionate about. So after my final stint at a real job working as a consultant for Accenture, I actually jumped off the treadmill, if you will, for a while. Spent a year studying wooden boat building and spent a couple of years actually restoring wooden boats, which was highly rewarding emotionally and from a sort of craftsmanship perspective. And actually it was a good introduction to sort of, custom production, if you will. As rewarding as it was emotionally, it was slightly less so financially. So then by the mid 2000s, I found myself at the business end of things, first as a chief operating officer and then later CEO of a small sailboat manufacturer called Finland Yachts in Finland, building sort of semi-custom high-end performance cruisers, if you will, between 28 and 46 foot. And then one thing led to another. This was great fun up until about 2008, the global financial crisis. So we spent 4 years building the company and then 2 years pretty much dismantling it. Right. And then in 2011, I joined a serial powerboat manufacturer to run their product development and marketing. And that was an almost 10-year stint, which was highly interesting from many perspectives, not least because about halfway through, the company was bought by Yamaha Motor Company. So it gave me insight both into Japanese corporate culture as well as working for a big multinational corporation. Then in 2019, it was time to move on, so I was headhunted to run Baltic Yachts, which is a high-end manufacturer of custom composite sailing superyachts up in Western Finland. And from there, in 23, then the path led to Fraser Yachts, where I'm currently.
Perfect. And what I found somewhat interesting about your background before you went into yachting is a lot of the roles were either, obviously it was IT related, but had sort of sales and marketing background. So I was wondering, the question I wanted to ask is around, did that experience help you in those future roles of COO or CEOs?
Well, of course, having a good understanding of sales and marketing helps you in any management role, really, in any industry. I find whether it's B2C or B2B, whether it's crafting products or selling services, there's a lot of common ground in terms of just the basic salesmanship and basic sort of laws of marketing, if you will.
Yeah, and is there any sort of experience that you didn't get that you'd wish you'd had now having been in a position to look back now and see your sort of career? Is there any experience that you wish you got ahead of becoming sort of the leaders in these sort of roles?
Not necessarily. I think sort of 7 years spent in professional services at the sort of really early days of the inception of the internet as we know it today, that was hugely beneficial, mainly from the perspective that as a 25-year-old, you got access to boardrooms, you got to see many, many different industries, many, many different companies in varying stages of evolution. So that really was a good sort of add-on to the business school experience. I guess two things that in hindsight I would have studied harder during my sort of educational days. Probably I would have spent more time learning more languages, because even speaking 3 languages fluently and French reasonably still, it would be great to have a couple of more languages in the toolbox. And then I probably would have taken a few more courses on the sort of legal side of things.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that is the languages just because of the type of clientele that you tend to work with and the industry that you're in. Is that where it's important to you, or is that just a personal thing?
It's a personal thing. I've been fortunate to work with many, many different cultures in multilingual settings, and the more languages you have access to sort of in a reasonably fluent manner really help you understand the different cultures and what makes people tick, because at the end of the day, that's really in many cases what management is all about, is sort of creating an atmosphere where people can thrive and perform at their very best.
And so you're about a year and a half into being at Fraser Yachts, is that right, first of all?
That's about right. I started in September of 23, the week of the Monaco Yacht Show.
Perfect. And how have you found your first sort of year and a half? It's a really good time to actually be checking in with you now, because you've probably settled into the role a little bit more. How are you finding it?
It's been an absolute blast. I've enjoyed every minute of it. And, as we were sort of reflecting and looking back, it's great to have a company with sort of a rich backstory and an illustrious history, if you will. It's wonderful to work for a company that has a strong brand, but at the end of the day, especially when you're on the services side of things, your primary asset is really the people. The Monaco Yacht Show 2023 was probably the most enjoyable Monaco show that I've ever done, and I've done quite a few, because first week on the job, so nobody had really filled my calendar with a lot of meetings and appointments, so I actually had time to walk around the docks, whereas until then I'd usually been sort of handcuffed to a yacht and not really had much time to walk around and take in the show. And the one thing that sort of was the common denominator when I met industry people, ex-colleagues, subcontractors, partners, whatever, was that their remark was usually, "Oh, Fraser, you have great people." And I have found that to be very, very true during my past 18 months here.
Perfect. And talking about Fraser then, so obviously, as you mentioned there, it's got a really illustrious sort of background. It's been highly successful for a long, long time. What would you say outside of people? Because I agree with that. I think obviously people is going to be pivotal to the performance and the actual business itself. But outside of that, what else do you think Fraser does that's different to everybody else?
Well, I think when David Fraser founded the company on the west coast of the US in 1947, his personal values, sort of integrity, trust, respect, were really quite, at the core of who we are today, 70 some years later. That's steeped into the walls and very much steeped into the corporate culture. And the reason why that's important to me is that we essentially operate in an ecosystem of extreme scarcity. The total global sales brokerage market for yachts 30 meters plus, that's about 750, 800 transactions in a good year. There's about, depending on how you slice and dice the statistics, there's about 8,000 super yachts in the entire fleet, all of them essentially unique. Now, the buyers and the sellers, and also by extension the charterers, they are all unique personalities who have their sort of, very own preferences, exactly what their dream looks like.
It's very interesting. Do you find, is it very, very different, the types of people that buy yachts? Because obviously there's going to be quite a fluctuation there in the types of person that's going to buy, but do you think it is quite a wide gap between different people, or is it fairly similar, the types of people that come?
There's a really, really wide bell curve. I was speaking at the Super Yacht Forum in Amsterdam at Metz last year on a panel where Martin Redmayne was the moderator. He'd done this sort of qualitative research because he'd been spending sleepless nights trying to figure out, why somebody would choose to endeavor into something like owning an asset like a super yacht. You'd expect the answers to be fairly sort of varying, waking up in epic destinations in the lap of luxury and changing those destinations basically daily at your whim, or enjoying a very sort of private, secluded lifestyle, spending time with family and friends. And while all that is true, what he found was that the fundamental reason, the root cause, if you will, is actually far simpler than that. These people are united just by their sheer love of being at sea. Although I didn't grow up on super yachts, that's something that actually, in a way, the sea is the same for all, whether you experience it from a kayak or a super yacht. So there is a red thread that runs through all these very, very different client stories and personalities and preferences.
Interesting. And one question I have is about Fraser's growth and where you're looking to take it in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Have you got plans in place? Have you got ambitious plans or anything like that? Or is it fairly steady what you're looking to do?
Well, obviously, the ultimate end goal is world domination, as it has to be, also driven by our owner, Marine Max. I think there's room for the business to grow. And although last year, if we compare 24 to 23, it was a slightly declining market on the sales brokerage side, but sort of, focusing back on these core values that we mentioned previously, we actually managed to grow the business year on year, despite the market that was somewhat shrinking and diminishing. Really, the tougher the market, the more we tend to just focus on the stuff that we do really, really well, keep our heads down, execute well, because at the end of the day, for our clients, matters less if we are the biggest or number 3 or number 5 or whatever in the ranking. They are looking for the best possible solution for their particular use case, every one of which is different. And then we come full circle back to the people. Being able to hire, attract, and retain the best people in the industry allow you to continuously deliver stellar service. And that's one of the dynamics that I find different from the sort of super yacht building yard that I used to run before, where you actually had a physical asset that you worked upon every day, then until final delivery, and then it was delivered. It sort of stood as a testament to your great work, and will continue to do so for the next 50 to 100 years, because these yachts actually, they don't have a best before date if they are well maintained. Whereas with services, you can't produce them into a warehouse. Every interaction, you need to prove yet again why you are worthy of the trust that the client places.
I'd be interested to know, do you have, on the service side, do you have someone that oversees service specifically, or someone that drives that level, or is that your job?
By and large, I guess it's my job and my ultimate responsibility now. We have sort of a couple of core services, one obviously being brokerage, which is taking hand of second-hand assets, if you will. The other one is charter retail brokerage, where essentially you sell the dream in bite-sized pieces, 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. Then we have the flip side of that same coin, which is charter management, where we take care of everything, bringing the boat to the charter market. Then we have a discipline that is a little bit different to these before mentioned, which is called yacht management, which in really simplistic terms is taking care of everything with the assets from a technical safety manning perspective that the crew does not take care of. And then the last component of the puzzle is crew services, where we can provide full manning from deckhand to captain for any size of yacht.
Yes, there's quite a lot of different areas do you oversee all of those different areas, or do you have people in different?
Well, big picture, I oversee all of them, but we've sort of organized ourselves in business units, and each business unit has its respective head of or vice president or whatever may be appropriate for that function.
And you mentioned about diminishing markets. Is there any emerging markets that you've noticed, maybe Asia or different areas in the world, that are starting to do more in the yachting space?
Well, I usually say that for super yachting to really sort of thrive, as in the ability for actors to build a healthy commercial ecosystem in a geographical area, you need a couple of things. You need history, you need culture, you need destinations, and you need infrastructure. Now, all this can be fast forwarded. There's a couple of areas in the world specifically that I'm thinking of, mainly maybe the Saudi Arabian coastline in the Red Sea, but generally this takes quite a long time to sort of emerge organically, if you will, which is why many of the emerging markets that you mentioned, they are still emerging markets and will so be sort of in the short to mid-term. Long-term, firm believer in the potential in Asia and also the wider Arab Peninsula.
The next thing I want to cover with you is marketing, because with the sort of clientele that you're attracting, it's not as easy as maybe some other markets where you're obviously targeting high net worth individuals. So what have you found to be sort of the most effective way of getting in front of those people?
First of all, let me address that leading a little bit back into my previous experience at Baltic Yachts. Now, this is a yard building high-end custom sailing super yachts, mostly 100-foot plus and upwards. And at Baltic, we used to say that we have 2,500 potential customers in the world. Because firstly, you got to be in the sort of right income bracket, then you also have to be passionately interested in specifically sailing. And not only that, but the combination of relative cruising comfort with a little bit of a flair and touch of performance. Now that should make marketing pretty easy because you know who you're talking to. And of these 2,500, probably about 60% were already in the CRM. That's actually in reality not necessarily the case because it's a hard audience to address efficiently through any forms of mass communication, which really leads us to something that is intrinsically tied into the marketing, which is this is still a very, very sort of trust and people focused industry. The clients primarily trust the person they're speaking to, whether it's the sales broker or the charter broker or the yacht manager or the crew administrator that they're speaking to. You know, Fraser is a good housekeeping seal of approval umbrella upon that, but it takes time to get to within the sort of circle of trust of the clients, and there's only so much you can do through sort of generic means of marketing to get to that.
Right, so it's not as if you guys can throw up some advertising on television or on digital or anything like that. It's more about reaching these people and networking with them and working with them over potentially years of time. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
and
okay.
that's where the sort of reputation and backstory and nickel and chrome image, if you will, of word of mouth that somebody within your circle of trust can confirm that yes, this is an outfit. These are people that you can trust. Becomes so penultimately important.
Yeah, so that kind of leads well onto the sort of the sales process and how you sort of go about reaching these people and selling to these people. Essentially, I know it sounds a little bit odd. Phrasing it like that, but what does the sort of sales process typically look like for you guys?
There's no typical process, and obviously discretion is a huge part of what we do. It's really sort of at the core, the essence of remaining within this circle of trust, if you will. So I'm going to go back again to my experience at Baltic, because I consider those things to some extent already prescribed. I was there for a little under 5 years. And during my time, there were 2 contracts signed that could not have been more different to each other. One was a client that the first contact was made 18 years before at the Monaco Yacht Show. And a continuous dialogue, sometimes cooling off, sometimes heating up, but it took 18 years to get to the point where the stars aligned and the project was actually started. The other one, a new acquaintance, it took 6 months from first introduction to the first letter of intent being crafted. And both were, sailing boats around the sort of 110, 130 foot bracket. So there's no typical process. Each and every process is truly, truly unique. And once again, we're talking sort of minute numbers here. If there's about 750 brokerage transactions in an average, reasonably good year, if you look at new builds over 30 meter, the numbers are far fewer. We could be looking at maybe 180, 200, 220 build contracts signed in a good year.
Yeah, that makes sense. And would you say the majority of your clients come to you, whereas they reach out to you, or do you meet them in situations like the yacht shows that you guys will?
I think all of the above. Obviously, it's always fortuitous if you can treat an existing client so well within business unit X that they end up also engaging your services across other business units. But we do need new clients. So boat shows are quite an important vehicle for that. Other types of events and activities and activations could be conferences, could be various venues where family offices or sort of gatekeepers for the ecosystems that these yachts essentially are. Each yacht is an ecosystem of its own, with its own dynamics, if you will, of who makes what type of decisions and what's the command chain like and how quickly do you get the decisions. So it's really an unholy mix of a variety of different venues.
I would say if I was a salesperson coming into your organization, I'd be like, where do I start? Because there's so many different ways you can go about doing it. But I do love that at the same time, because you obviously want to just get yourself out there and be in front of the right type of people and do that consistently. That's what I would sort of take from what you're telling me there.
Yeah, and I mean, if we go back to one business area that we mentioned, the sales brokerage, typically it takes 5 to 7 years to be able to gauge whether somebody who's sort of starting afresh and hasn't been doing it before, whether they have the right tenacity to actually become a successful sales broker. And even after that, it takes another easily decade before they've built their personal contact network or book of business, if you will, to such an extent that actually sort of, people are starting to call them either through referrals or through their own direct contacts. And the same actually to some extent is true for the successful charter retail brokers. The churn is slightly higher on the charter side, so there might be a slightly accelerated path to reasonable business there, but still it takes a long time because we go back to getting into that circle of trust. There's only so many concurrent interactions that you physically can handle within the duration of a year if you want to do it well, and you have to do it well.
Well, yeah, and if someone's going to be spending that sort of money, right, they want to have the best level of service and they want to be looked after. So I definitely appreciate that. The next thing I wanted to sort of touch on was how things potentially have changed since COVID and using more technology in the way that you guys present yachts and sell your yachts. So I wanted to ask you, do you do anything like virtual consultations or digital tours, anything like that when you are showing yachts, or is it all in person?
Well, a lot of it after the pandemic sort of went back to in person because this type of asset class really is a touchy, feely thing. So as whatever case at hand progresses towards a higher probability of potentially closing or transacting or whatever you want to call it, I think almost invariably, there's got to be exceptions to the rule, but almost invariably it would entail a personal visit. But sort of for the earlier stuff, there's more virtual walkthroughs. There's a huge demand for sort of proper in-depth walkthrough videos. And then another discipline that sort of falls under management for us, which is new build project management. There, actually, if the geographical distance between the commissioning client, the buyer of the new build, and the yard is prohibitively long, virtual walkthroughs are used quite often, and they're used both during the build process as well as during the design phase, because virtual reality is actually a really, really good way to get a sense of sort of the volume and the color and texture and feeling of a space where 2D images would fall short or distort the dimensions and not really give you a sense of the volume, because especially sense of volume is something that is really, really hard to sort of divulge without actually visiting it. But even if you visit a yacht under construction at a yard somewhere when it's sort of in the early stages of construction, you're standing in the main salon, but it looks nothing like the finished product will. So they're a well-executed 3D model with the right lighting and the right colors and textures in place and soft furnishings is actually a huge sort of added value, because you need to use your imagination less and the space becomes alive.
That makes perfect sense. So it's more, technology is pretty much used more in the sort of new build process rather than the secondary market where they can obviously touch and feel it. It's already an existing product. Is that right?
Well, yes, but remember then again, we're in a market of scarcity. There are really no hard and fast rules. This is the way it's done. So, I mean, there have been significant refit projects or conversion projects where essentially you have an asset and you want to make a major change to it. And there obviously all these same technologies are at our disposal.
Perfect. And in terms of technology then, just to cover this entirely, is there any way that you use things like, it's going to be a buzzword and everybody's using it at the moment, so AI, have you implemented that within the business in any way to help with the customer service more than anything?
Not so much customer service. We obviously with incoming contact, whether it's leads or inquiries or whatever, we try to sort of open up a live communication with the appropriate person on our end as quickly as possible, and try to remove obstacles on that way rather than sort of create new ones. But we are experimenting with it for sort of content production and helping out with background research. It's looking fairly promising.
Perfect. And the last question I wanted to cover with you is more around, obviously your background is very much in boats and yachts, but obviously it's an element here where you are running a luxury brand. So I was wondering if you had any advice for anyone else out there that wanted to build a luxury brand or is in the process of building a luxury brand, anything that you would say is invaluable for them to know?
Well, I guess slightly flippantly, don't start in Finland because there's really only one true luxury brand there, and that's Baltic Yachts. On a more serious note, maybe, and this isn't really in my mind, maybe constricted to only the luxury sphere. To me, and this is my personal reflection, I find that life is way more rewarding if you work with something that genuinely resonates for you, that you're genuinely interested and passionate about, because then it's less about the money. Because work is fun more or less every day anyway. So I guess that would be my advice, sort of dig deep and figure out what it is that you are truly, truly interested in. Then if you find that it is, the luxury sphere by and large, then try to get an internship at one of the bigger companies, because they approach it quite systematically. And there's actually quite a big disconnect if you look at sort of, entry-level products and mid-market products and premium products. They have a lot of stuff in common in terms of the sort of the logic of marketing and the sort of, rules by which you can get a price premium, when you go from a mid-range price product to a premium price product. But then once you go to genuine luxury, many of those rules break. So the sooner you get to understand the sort of idiosyncrasies of that, the better.
I think that's great advice. So I'm going to leave it there, Anders. I think you've been a great guest. I really appreciate you spending the time. If someone wanted to follow you and follow your updates or you as a person, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I'm not a particularly good preacher for social media because my Instagram mostly has pictures of my kids on skis. I do aim to have a relatively frequent updating cadence on LinkedIn. So I guess LinkedIn would probably be the best place to follow me.
And from a Fraser Yachts perspective, where's the best place for him to look? It's probably obvious, probably the website.
Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Anders. Thank you for spending it with me. And you've been great.
Thanks, Oliver, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.